Ahead on Straight Talk, it was a key promise on the campaign trail.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
Now, President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration across the country is in full effect.
The results of mass deportation are more important to this country than anything.
But not without opposition, spawning a minefield of legal challenges and protests.
When immigrant flights are under attack, what do we do?
We sit down with two experts in the field of immigration to detangle some of the misconceptions surrounding the president's efforts.
We've gotten so comfortable, I think, with the asylum process.
And the communities he's targeting.
For them, it could mean their families getting torn apart.
Right now on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Tim Gordon in for Stephanie Domerat. This week we're going to peel back some of the layers making up the debate over immigration, from legal battles over the Trump administration's tactics to what's driving voter sentiment about foreign citizens entering the country. And joining us to break down this complex topic is Professor Juliet Stumpf, a professor of law at Lewis and Clark Law School. Professor Stumpf's expertise lies in both immigration law and the intersection of immigration and criminal law, sometimes called crimigration law. She has also been named Immigration Law Trailblazer by the National Law Journal. And also joining us today is Professor Alexander Sager, an associate professor of philosophy at Portland State University. Professor Sager specializes in the political philosophy and ethics of migration. In 2020, Professor Sager won the Choice Outstanding Academic Title Award for his book, Against Borders: Why the People of the World Need Free Movement. Alex, Juliet, thank you so much for joining us today on Straight Talk. We really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
All right, and we're going to start today with your help. We really want to pick your expertise here to better understand immigration in the United States. From the nuts and bolts of it all, also in context with our history in this. So give you both a minute or two to have an opening statement. Go ahead, Juliet.
Sure. So immigration has been a tremendous part of our American history, really since the beginning of the country. And before that, as we know, anyone who is here who's not Native American is either an immigrant or has immigrant forefathers, foremothers. So that's something that's always been important to our country, and that remains true and will be true in the future. I learned recently that one of the things that we're going to be looking to in the future is actually competition with other countries for immigrants that can help us with our economy, our communities, our society.
Wow, that's interesting, and it's something that's already happening today, right?
Yeah.
Alex, how about you? Go ahead and give us your take.
Well, I mean, I would agree with everything you said, and I'm a social and political philosopher, so I'm interested in what is a good society and what is a just society, and the reality is immigration is a huge part of who we are and how we address immigration. In our policies, in our communities, it really speaks to our identity and what we aspire to be, and that's what I try to articulate in some of my work.
Sure. Well, Gallup just put out some new polling information that shows the surge in concern about immigration has really dropped off this year. In fact, Gallup found Americans have grown more positive, with those wanting immigration reduced, dropping from 55% in 2024 to 30% today. And at the same time, a record high 79% of U.S. adults say immigration is a good thing for the country, up from 64% in 2024. So Alex, what do you make of that? And also, are there some common misconceptions about immigration in this country that you might want to dispel?
Well, I mean, there's, the statistics are really kind of interesting, and I think what we've seen in recent months is when people sort of start seeing more the reality of immigration and the reality of immigration enforcement, and then also start seeing stories about the immigrants in our community, and they start becoming humanized. And there's one thing that I've kind of been a social science that I've always found intriguing, that where you see the most opposition to immigration are places without immigrants. When you are somewhere with immigrants, they're your neighbors, the people you work with, you go to church with, your kids go to school together. And I think there is a lot of positive sentiment toward immigration that often gets hidden by the way that people frame the questions.
Right. Some might argue that, well, because we've had a stronger immigration enforcement going on, that the concern is lessened. Does that play at all?
I think there's actually two ways of answering that. In some ways, immigration enforcement actually changes the way people feel toward immigrants negatively, because it kind of paints immigrants as a community or a group that needs to be policed more.
Right.
But in some ways, I think as Alex was saying, if somebody is the subject of immigration enforcement, and it's somebody who's a member of the community or who's been here for a long time, or has some reason to be here, and they're the subject of enforcement, or their due process rights are being violated, I think it really changes people's minds.
Yep. Well, help us understand immigration a little bit by the numbers. Earlier this month, President Trump visited the Florida Detention Center that's just been put up in the Everglades, dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. There he claimed the Biden administration allowed 21 million people into the country illegally, adding the number could be much higher. The most recent DHS data from 2022 shows a total of just under 11 million unauthorized immigrants living in the U.S. at that time, and that includes migrants who entered as far back as 1980s. Alex, do you know where that statistic comes from that Trump has used there in Florida and a lot of times recently? And is there some context there missing?
I think you have to be very careful about any claims made by the Trump administration. They play fast and loose with the facts there. But let's just take that 11 million number, which as you mentioned, is people. The majority of people who are unauthorized in the country have been here for a decade or over. And there's something that I find kind of fascinating, and this actually connects to immigration enforcement. So after the 1996 under the Clinton Immigration Act, they actually really came down really hard on border enforcement.
Right.
And the idea was deterrence, and it started pushing people out into the desert or into treacherous routes. And one side effect of that is people started dying more frequently. But the other side about this is it actually increased the number of unauthorized immigrants living in the U.S. And the reason is because there was more enforcement. So what we used to have circular migration where people would come up, work for a season, and then go back home.
Sure.
And then now, because you have to rely on smugglers, it's dangerous. Our enforcement policies gave rise to more people that don't have legal status in the country, and I think that's kind of often happens with these types of policies.
Right. That's an interesting point, and it really speaks to the seasonal worker aspect of a lot of our migrants that come and help with that. In terms of unauthorized immigration, do we know roughly how many of those immigrants who would be considered criminals, other than the fact that they cross the border illegally, which is a federal crime, a misdemeanor, but for things like drug trafficking or anything like that? And I don't know if you have a ballpark on that, or what you can say about unauthorized immigrants in the country and crime. Juliet.
Sure. There's some really important and substantial research on this, and one of the most important things I think that people can sometimes misunderstand is that immigrants actually commit crimes at lower rates than native-born U.S. citizens do, and that's true, including it includes undocumented immigrants.
Right.
So undocumented immigrants actually commit crimes at lower rates than U.S. citizens do, and when a population of undocumented immigrants moves into a city, there's a really small but significant drop in crime rates. That study has been done on a nationwide basis.
Wow. So fairly law-abiding folks, and maybe don't want to get into trouble because they're here, right?
Yes.
That certainly goes against the rhetoric that we hear a lot from the Trump administration, claiming so many are murderers, thugs, and worse. So, yeah. Well, let's talk about the current enforcement efforts of the Trump administration, if we can. I think a lot of people want to know, what authority does the federal government, the administrative branch in particular, have to conduct the raids that they are conducting in places like churches, schools, our workplaces, even our fields? Is that legal?
That's a really good question. And so ICE, which is usually the agency that's doing these worksite raids and enforcement actions, has arrest authority. And when we think about arrests, we kind of think about that as criminal, but those arrests are actually administrative arrests. Most of the people who are being arrested are not being arrested for a crime, they're being arrested for a civil violation.
Because being in the country, once you're here, if you're undocumented. That's a civil issue.
That's exactly right. So that work site raid and those arrests, most of them are arrests for civil violations.
And so what about going into a workplace, a business, a private business? Do they have to have permission? Do they need a warrant?
They're subject to the same Fourth Amendment requirements that police are. So the Fourth Amendment requires a warrant unless there's an exception.
So Alex, as you're seeing what's going down and given that legal standing, what do you see?
Well, I guess, what I would add, the federal government has extensive immigration enforcement powers, and this is, despite Oregon being a sanctuary state. But I think sometimes that's the wrong question. Every law enforcement agency has discretion. And so if you ask, should they do raids in schools, churches, or so on and so forth? I mean, you might have a legal right to do that, but, you're affecting children, you're affecting, people in their places of worship. And you're affecting, and this is something that's, I think, really important to understand about immigration enforcement. It affects everybody. Immigrants that don't have legal status, permanent residents, citizens. And we really need to think about, how we want to approach that as a society.
Sure, absolutely. Border Czar Tom Homan recently discussed probable cause when it comes to ICE agents approaching and detaining people. Here's his take on Fox News.
They don't need probable cause to walk up to somebody, briefly detain them, and question them. They just need the totality of the circumstances, right? They just got through their observation, get articulable facts based on their location, their occupation, their physical appearance, their actions.
Yeah, and some are pushing back against this. So Juliet, can you explain the law around this issue?
I could just barely hear.
I'm sorry, he's basically saying, we look at a lot of different things, appearance, language, location, et cetera, to make a decision whether we approach someone and possibly detain them, but we don't need probable cause. Do they need probable cause?
They need, in order for them to make an arrest, they need the equivalent of probable cause. Okay. So the language in this statute is actually different from probable cause, but courts have interpreted to say it's basically the same standard.
Okay.
In order to approach someone and stop them and talk with them, that's actually, Homan's right, that's not a probable cause standard. So it is lower than that.
But to detain them, they can at least go up and visit,
They can speak with somebody or
briefly detain.
Yeah, exactly. The other important thing to understand about immigration arrests and the decision who to stop is that the Supreme Court held in 1975 that ICE immigration officials can use race as one factor in making that decision. So I think when Homan says appearance, that may be what he's talking about.
Okay. As you see this playing out, Alex, concerns about the way these, we were told they'd be going after criminals first, and now they're going to Home Depots.
I think what we're seeing right now is, we're moving away from some attempt at targeted immigration enforcement to quotas. And ICE has been given quotas to say you should arrest this number of people every day. That's a terrible policy, because invariably what's going to happen is you're going to have agents looking for people to arrest. Yeah. And as Juliet shared, racial profiling is allowed. But what we're seeing is we're seeing permanent residents, we're seeing citizens who are picked up and arrested, because of their appearance, and that's a terrifying thing to think about as a society.
Yep, it certainly isn't, particularly if they're not given a day in court to make their case and show who they are, whoever they may be. Yeah. All right, well, thank you both very much. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue our conversation into immigration with Juliet Stumpf and Alex Sager. Welcome back as we continue our conversation on immigration with Professor Juliet Stumpf of Lewis and Clark Law School and Professor Alex Sager from PSU. Thanks for joining us again here for the second half. And let's talk about sanctuary state status and what it means. I mean, here we are in Oregon and Washington, California as well, the whole West Coast. Sanctuary states, we know that that means that our local authorities don't cooperate with federal authorities in a lot of ways over immigration issues. Are there any other protections? What else about sanctuary states matters?
Sanctuary matters a lot. One of the reasons that the Sanctuary Promise Act was passed here was to protect the community as a whole from being kind of torn apart. And so the idea of sanctuary is basically the idea that if we have Oregonians who are immigrants, and that the state itself should protect its residents, its immigrant residents. And one of the reasons that's important is that under the Obama administration, actually, and under some previous administrations, there was a policy to have police engage with immigration police and try to deport people very quickly. So a lot of it allowed racial profiling to happen as police themselves started to see themselves as having an immigration policing role. And so one of the things that Oregon was doing in passing that Sanctuary Act was to try to keep the police and the immigration officials in their own lanes.
Yeah. Yet this is a really fairly divisive issue nationwide. A lot of states and their residents don't agree with this status for sanctuary states. Alex, what does that mean about the kind of the divide over immigration in this country?
Well, I mean, I think there's been kind of a discourse about immigration where it's been treated as a security issue, and there's been a discourse of talking about immigration in terms of criminal law, and Juliet is one of the experts on this, and I think it's actually quite a dangerous discourse, and I think it actually kind of misleads people. I mean, sanctuary policies, they don't prevent immigration enforcement. And local police will cooperate if you have a judicial warrant, to arrest somebody. But what it does is, in a lot of ways, it actually helps our police do their jobs. Immigration enforcement is complicated. You need to actually know what you're doing, and so you will see errors when they're doing that. But you're also thinking about, what I want my police force to do is I want them to be focusing on serious crimes. And I want people in the community, regardless of their immigration status, to be comfortable reporting serious crimes. And when immigrants are afraid to interact with the police, then it makes all of us less safe. So there's a lot of very pragmatic reasons, for sanctuary policies. It's good policy. Similarly with things like hospitals. I don't want my emergency room workers checking my immigration status, as a U.S. citizen, because maybe I don't have the right paperwork to prove it, at the time. I want them to do their jobs, and similarly in schools, where I think all children have a right to education, and it's chilling and it's incredibly harmful to children if they don't feel protected in that space.
Yeah.
So a lot of benefits, and I don't think people fully understand how much these policies actually protect the whole community, regardless of the views on immigration.
Yeah. All right, well, KGW visited a big berry farm in Washington County this week to talk about migrant workers and the current policy. So far, they're getting the berries picked, they're getting them in, that's good, but we know there is fear and concern right now.
I hear an airplane coming, they say, oh my God, ICE is coming. I say, well, it's not that, but they kind of were. They still coming and not quite be so scared because we've been telling people, you know what, it's not gonna happen here.
So, Juliet, can you talk about the economic impact of mass deportations, particularly in the Pacific Northwest? Anything local there that, will it create more jobs for people who are here as legal residents? Will it change wages, anything like that, or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what we know is that the Pacific Northwest has depended on immigrant labor for probably about 100 years. And so as Alex was talking about that circular migration, immigrants were coming up from Mexico and other parts of Latin America to work in the Pacific Northwest and other parts of the country. It's been really important to the agricultural industry. Yeah. So to completely recreate a workforce, by taking immigrants out of that would be really difficult. And it would probably require a lot of rising food prices if it were even to succeed.
Yeah.
So it would be a tremendous impact on the economy, actually.
Yeah. And the fear out there is real for workers who are here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Well, I'll just say something that I found interesting. This was a few years back with the United Farm Workers, and that they had a campaign which was take our jobs, and they invited members of Congress to come and spend a day working as migrant farm workers. And I think only one or two of our representatives actually took them up on it. But it says a lot about these sectors. I mean, it's incredibly vital, important, but also brutal work. And we've tried this before, and it's not like U.S. citizens are eager to take these jobs.
Yep. Just a couple of minutes left, but I want to hear from both of you about, if you think this system is working, and if you don't, what would be more effective long-term? And Alex, I'm going to come to you first. What would be a more effective long-term solution to our immigration issues?
Yeah, I don't think this is actually all that mysterious. I mean, I think there's kind of two things that need to be put in place for a long-term solution. One is enough visas, legal channels for people to come to the country through processes that everybody agrees are fair. And going back to your question about support for immigration, I think there's pretty overwhelming support in this country for legal migration. And the problem is often people do not have a legal path to do that. And then I think the other reality is we have those 11 million, I mean, estimates differ, but people who do not have legal status, and many of them have been here for more than a decade, sometimes longer than that. We need a process in which people can regularize their status. And these things have been proposed, they've been done in the past. They are realistic, but we've been focusing on security for a long time, and there is a lot of border security. I mean, anybody who tells you differently does not know the reality of the budgets for ICE, for Customs and Border Patrol. But what we've failed to do for a long time is figuring out, pathways to legal residence, to citizenship, and actually aligning our immigration policy with the needs of our communities.
Thank you for that. And Juliet, and you want to tackle that as well? What would work better?
Sure. Well, I'll follow up on Alex's suggestions. Actually, there's already ways in our immigration law that our immigration law is not broken, but it does need a reboot. It needs an immigration law 2.0. And some of that might be as easy as, for example, regularizing status. We used to do that historically just every once in a while. It was just part of our legislative process. But Congress has been deadlocked on immigration.
They have been, and they've been screaming for a long time that it needs to be overhauled, really, and that we need a big change in the way we do it. But I think that's particularly true for Democrats, don't you think? Or how do you see it?
When you actually look at the bills that have been introduced in Congress, there's a lot of overlap on both the Republican and Democratic side when they get down to it. Yeah. And what they fight about actually is temporary workers. But I think one of the things that Alex is talking about is if we were able to fix our immigration laws so that it matched the needs of a country and the needs of immigrants and their family members, that's really what Congress needs to do. But in the meantime, the executive branch can regulate its enforcement mechanisms, introduce the kinds of programs and projects that can do some of that work already within legal means.
Right. That would seem to be a more responsive way to go, meeting what's happening here on the ground.
I think that's right.
Yeah. We just have another minute or so, maybe 30 seconds. Final thought, give us a quick statement for it.
Sure. I have always looked at immigration as both the wind in our sails, as as kind of a culture, as a community here in Oregon. And I think that's bearing out, as we see it now. And I think what we're seeing now, especially with the berry farms, is a situation where immigration enforcement is more based on fear than it is on the law.
And for you, Alex?
I think you said that very nicely. So I'm just going to agree.
That is great. Well, we sure appreciate you both coming in and sharing your expertise with us today. Very informative, I think, for people to hear what you had to say.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you for watching. We hope you found this informative. Again, I'm Tim Gordon, in for Stephanie Domerat. Stephanie will be back next week. And remember, you can stream Straight Talk on your own schedule. Download the free KGW Plus app, available right now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.